Okay, now you should be looking at the intro screens to Divorcing a Narcissist, Coping with Borderline Personality Disorders. Can everybody see that before we jump further ahead? Okay, good. We're going to take a second first, just ask a handful of questions just to get a better sense of who is on the other side and how we can help you both in this webinar and with future ones. Great. Okay, going to quickly move to the next poll. And mind you, these answers are not displayed to anybody but me. I'm not going to post that one. Just two more quick ones, and then we'll jump right into the materials. All right, and last one. All right, and with that, I'm going to close out the polls and jump right back into our webinar. Give me 1 second to make sure that we're all lined up here. Again, if throughout the presentation there's any problems with sound or visual, just type into your pane where it says questions, and I'm going to try to keep my eye on that as we go forward so that I can see if there's any kind of issues or problems, okay? I'm going to give you a little background on how we're going to handle today's webinar. Today is a 60-minute webinar. I've usually done either 30 or 45 minutes in the past. I decided to make this a little longer. This is actually an encore presentation of a seminar I did by a similar title maybe about a year ago, Divorcing a Webinar and Other Borderline Personality Disorders. I elected to do another one because the response was astronomical. I posted it on my YouTube page and my firm's website, and there was almost, I don't know, I think like 19,000 views. And I have and continue to get calls even today from around the country, people asking for help with regard to these issues. So I thought it might be better to do a little more in-depth presentation on these topics since it seems to be such a significant need of people. So like I said, it's a 60-minute webinar. It's one-way communication, which means you can hear me, hopefully, and I will not be able to hear you. You are able to post questions on the chat pane that's on your right-hand side. There's a point for questions. I'm going to do something different in this webinar than I have in my past ones, and that is I'm going to try to address questions as we go. I typically had waited until the end to address questions, but I think sometimes people just skip over it or miss issues and forget to ask questions at the end, so I'm going to try to do it as we go. This is being recorded, so I should be able to forward to you a copy of this if you want to hear it afterwards. They will also be uploaded at some point in time to my website. Now next I'm going to give you a little background on me. For those that don't know me or haven't worked with me, this is me. My name is Brad Micklin. I'm the managing member of the Micklin Law Group. I am a member of the New Jersey and Pennsylvania State Bar Associations. I'm also licensed to appear in both state and federal courts. I was admitted to practice in 1996. Once I graduated law school, I first held a judicial clerkship with the Honorable Eugene Austin in the supervising special civil part in Bergen County. Special civil part at that point handled all special civil litigation, which I think was up to $15,000, small claims litigation, and all of the landlord-tenant cases for all of Bergen County. From there, I moved on to complex commercial litigation with Kessler and Associates in Clifton, New Jersey. We did complex commercial and corporate litigation, real estate transactions, and similar cases. And then I left there. For the past 15 or 18 years, I've been managing the Micklin Law Group. Our firm is concentrated in divorce, family law, and estate planning and litigation. Divorce cases and family cases include things such as custody, child support, parenting time, domestic violence, and of course divorces. Our wills and trust divisions handle not only drafting wills and various trusts, but also litigating contested probate matters and will contests. And we also do revocable, irrevocable, and special needs trust planning for those that may need similar trusts. All right, I'm told that you can't see the slides, so I'm going to try. Can you see the slides now before I move forward? Just somebody type in real quick. All right, just give me 1 second. All right, can you see slides now? Anybody just quickly type up real quick. I'm on a new platform, so I'm still kind of maneuvering my way around it. Current slide that's up has just a couple of different awards that I was going to discuss. Okay, so it sounds like everybody can see, so I'm going to keep going. So this I put up here not to try to boast, but to give you a sense of the work that you can expect if you are or will be working with our firm. The first one is 2004. The Legal Network named our firm, or me, top lawyer in New Jersey. I also received a similar award from the National Advocates for the top 100 attorneys in New Jersey that same year. The one to the right, top client distinction, is from Martindale Hubbell, which is the largest attorney database. It's an independent award. I've received it 2013, 14, and 15. On the bottom, the excellent rated attorneys from ABO, which is, again, an attorney network. They have an independent mechanism by which they review and rank attorneys. I received the excellent rated attorney award from 2012 through and including 15. And then lastly, this year, which I haven't put up, I received awards from the American Institute of Family Attorneys. I was also named the nation's top 1%. And the Global Director of Who's Who named me top lawyer in 2015 also. So let me just give you a little quick summary if you want to look through. This is how we're going to break down the information. If anybody here had attended the first webinar, it was more general information. Now I'm breaking it down before, during, and after, so you get a better sense of what you may or may not need to deal with as you go through it. Section 1, I'm just going to give you basic breakdowns of the disorders, the types and what to look for, similarities and differences. During the litigation, what to expect, how to handle both issues like litigation, custody, and general tips for maneuvering through that. And then lastly, after litigation, how to prepare. And the preparation, as is noted here, will be what you should be doing before and after, but I put it in after because it's a good way to wrap up. Emergency plans and how to deal with child-related issues that may or may not come up. Now, before I jump into before litigation, any questions? Any questions about anything that we did mention or that we may be mentioning after this review here? All right, seeing none, let's move into the first stage, how to handle narcissism or borderline personality disorders before litigation. So let's first look at the different general types and definitions. Here you have on the left is, and this is more of a global overview for all of the disorders. And in a few minutes, we'll get to some specifics, but generally, the traits common to all of them are instability, manipulative, unstoppable mood changes. This is really just something to look for as you're trying to determine whether or not you actually have these issues and when you need to deal with them. The range of behaviors, extreme violence, and this can be in many different forms. It can be physical, it can be mental. In many cases, it's hard to recognize if you've been living in the situation because it's often difficult for victims to recognize that there's abuse in any form. Public humiliation, sometimes you're aware of it, sometimes you're unfortunately not. It also will depend on the type of personality disorder that we will talk about in a few minutes. Gaslighting, it's a phrase from an old movie, I believe in the 60s. I actually forget the title now, unfortunately. But that generally is a concept that's very common to most BPDs, and that is where they attempt to make the victim or the other spouse believe that they are the ones with the problem. And since it occurs mostly behind closed doors, it tends to be a very effective mode of education because it's a repetitive, usually long-term approach where the other spouse, the victim I'm going to call them, starts to actually believe it and doubts their ability to break free from it. On the top right, there's two main types, acting in versus acting out, and that really means acting in, their conduct is more directed towards them. They make themselves the victim or they make themselves the ones that are being affected and hurt so that they get sympathy from others. Versus acting out, which is usually towards others, obviously their spouses, out in public, even sometimes to the judge. I had a case recently where a narcissist posted a website about the judge in this case because he had no other way to battle him. He wasn't able to do it in court, so he took other methods. But it's not just limited to the spouse. It goes far to every party. And last, while nobody really knows the specific causes, my research has indicated a lot of them typically have childhood-related issues and family issues, which again we'll also discuss a little more further once we move into the more substantive information. Any questions about the general characteristics before I move on? All right, I'm not seeing any, and if you do, just type it up. Even if I move the slide, I'll get to it as soon as I take my next break in between slides. So next we're going to take a look at what to look for. Now, it's important for me to point out, obviously, I'm not a psychologist. I'm basing this, as well as all this information, both on a lot of research, a lot of experience handling these cases, and a lot of what I've noticed over the years. So this is really supposed to help you just to begin to identify whether or not you have these issues. And when it comes to borderline personality disorders and narcissism specifically, a lot of people believe that their spouses are or have these characteristics. And it's not necessarily the case in all of them, even when you do have these characteristics, because a lot of people will have characteristics of a borderline personality disorder or characteristics of a narcissist or be even narcissistic. Doesn't necessarily make them a narcissist. It doesn't necessarily rise to the level of the borderline personality disorder. And that's an important distinction to make because when it does rise to that level, which is less common than most people probably think, you probably will handle the litigation differently. But here are the things to look out for. First of all, excuses. Excuses made for their past and future conduct. Most commonly, it's going to be apologizing for abuse, poor behavior in the workplace, loss of jobs, things like that. Parental unfitness allegations, very, very common. It can also obviously be made to the parent or spouse, him or herself, but also out to friends and inside of litigation, whether or not you're even in litigation. Controlling behavior, walking on eggshells, idolization or devaluation Idolization obviously usually relates more to them idolizing or promoting themselves, where devaluation is obviously the other spouse and other members of either the family or the society as a whole. Repercussions for honesty. Kind of self-explanatory. It's usually difficult going back to the eggshell sort of situation. It's sometimes difficult to deal with these kinds of individuals. And I put these out to say look for it because it's often very difficult when you're in a relationship, especially the longer term the relationship is more in depth, whether there's children or complex financial issues. It's sometimes hard to see it, and also there are obviously usually good times and bad times to a relationship. So when a relationship is good, people are not looking for issues. It's sort of when they're at the end that they're looking back and realizing that there are in fact issues. So it's sometimes harder to analyze your own situation, sometimes helpful maybe to ask somebody else's opinion. And also, there's some kind of characteristics you can sometimes see. I've found, and this is just my personal experience, that there's often family dynamics in their immediate family, their nuclear family. Often there's issues with their relationship to their mother. Sometimes they either don't have one or that they have a very, very deep one. When they don't have one, it often suggests that the mother may have similar issues and that the two, mother and child, can't relate to one another because of that. More often than not, they will also either have a very close personal relationship, and that I find is more of an attempt to keep everything behind closed doors. So they will work to protect their children. They'll put money up for litigation. They'll go to court when they're involved or even when they're not involved. But overall, look for a dysfunction in the nuclear family, even if it's between the mother and father, the grandparents, if you have children, to see how their relationship. Often there'll be one spouse that maybe had chronic alcoholism, and there's a relationship issue with the mother, for instance, or the other spouse. So just, again, something to look for when you're trying to identify whether or not you think you are dealing with these issues or will be dealing with these issues. Real quick, any questions before I move on to the types of personality disorders? Okay, let's go quickly into types of personality disorders. Okay, so we have narcissism, antisocial personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, and dependent personality disorder. All of them are separate and apart. So I'll go through some basic characteristics, and I'll tell you some similarities I think you should be looking for in case if you're not able to identify which is which. First is narcissism. I put this first because it seems to be the most common, most prevalent in divorce cases. Whether or not it's the most prevalent disorder or whether or not it's just the most prevalent issue that raises marital discord, I don't know. Inside of these four characteristics I put here, grandiosity, admiration, entitlement, lack of empathy, all deal with self-image. And that's the key to a narcissism, is to realize that everything for them is about protecting their self-image. So anything that attacks their self-image is the devil and will be met with similar veracity. Next on the right, antisocial personality disorder. These five similar traits. I think the most important one to look here is a disregard for rights and regulations, basic rules of society. It goes also down to the last one where it says deviant. And this doesn't necessarily mean, it can mean in their personal relationship, but it can really mean in anything. I found a lot of times that this characteristic pops up in people who haven't filed taxes in years and don't seem to be concerned about it, disregard their employer regulations. They may even change employers often, because what I've also noticed with more so narcissists, but also antisocial personality disorders, they're often quite successful in their occupation. And when they're unable, like an antisocial is unable to keep a job, they're usually surprisingly able to get other similar good jobs. So they keep moving around, but still continue to succeed. It's quite surprising, but it's a common trait. So look for these kinds of traits when trying to identify whether or not you have this issue and which one you have. Histrionic, I think the key to this personality disorder is the excessive emotions. Anything as you look back that is just grossly, grossly disproportionate as a common trait, not just once in a while or at a certain event or a certain time in your life, but overall, if you can see that their emotional reactions are grossly disproportionate to the issue, you might be dealing with a histrionic. And then the last is dependent personality disorder, somewhat similar to the histrionic, but a little different. I think here the key is the victim mentality. And this is the one that most focuses on him or herself. Everything is about them. So as you look back, again, grossly disproportionate responses to something, but in a way that they believe they're victimized by everybody. They'll tell you past partners, they'll tell you their family members, past employers, and even yourself when you're in that relationship, common traits. Now, some of the similarities between, like, for instance, narcissism and antisocial, you'll notice one is a disregard for rules and social norms, I think is a very common trait for both of these. And second is a lack of empathy. And I think it's more so that they're more self-consumed and that consumption makes it hard to see and consider other people. When you look at the histrionic and the dependence, the similarities is they're both a sort of victim mentality. They're also both internal, or they're the focus of it, which I guess is similar to narcissism, but it's different. Narcissism is a projection. They project themselves outwardly, where histrionic and dependents are usually introverted and victimized by things. The difference between the histrionic and dependent, I think, is the level of behavior. The histrionic has excessive emotions. It would be very dramatic, large, significant outbursts, where the dependent personality is more subtle. Being a victim and convincing others through either guilt is very easy to do very subtly. You don't have to be loud or verbose about it. It's very passive, as I noted here. Now, in here, I put also under a dependent, I want to make a point that often marries a more aggressive person. That doesn't mean it's a bad thing. Being aggressive doesn't mean it's a negative thing, but it usually is a sort of opposites attract kind of situation. All right, in a second, I'm going to move on to some similarities and differences. Any questions up to this point? I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I do want to make sure to cover it as we go, so I'm not seeing anything up. So let's move to similarities and differences. Not a huge topic, but it's still good to be able to differentiate the two. As you get more and more involved with these issues, you may start to see that they're harder to differentiate. And if you're really involved with one of these, you're going to need to be able to do so. So similarities and differences, making false statements, very common. And that's to everybody, like I said before. It's not just to the other spouse or partner. It can be to their employer. It can be to their friends. It can be to the judge even, and usually will be. Adversarial world and delusional kind of go together. I mean, adversarial, delusional, black and white perspective. Sort of, they see the world in their own perspective, their own limitations. It's sort of a me against them or me against you even. There's usually not much of a partnership when these characteristics or these disorders are present. Maladaptive patterns, like I said, they act out of the norm. This and deviation from the norm. These two, don't confuse yourself with the phrasing to what it means in reality. And what I mean by that is just because they deviate from the norm doesn't mean it's a bad thing. Deviation from the norm, for instance, is partly that they're often very successful. They're often very charismatic. That's not part of the norm, and it's not a negative thing necessarily in and of itself, but it is a very common characteristic that's important to note. And it's important to realize that other people will be seeing them this way, which often makes it harder to show who the real people are. Lastly, like I said, there's often childhood issues, problems with the relationships with their parents, either substance abuse with either parents as a way to self-medicate, it could be, but there's generally something in the history of their childhood that would suggest there's more issues to deal with. Differences, not a lot other than what I mentioned before when we went through the 4 others. The 2 points I mentioned here, and I always give this caveat, this is not my finding, it's just from research, it's not to suggest anything, but borderline personality disorders, the histrionic and antisocial are more common in women, where the narcissistic and I'm actually forgetting the antisocial more common in men. I think that's because obviously there's psychological issues that I can't be fully familiar with, but I also think that it gets reinforced through the ages. I think that our society has tolerated certain conduct in certain genders as opposed to others. So a more dominating contact like antisocial narcissist is accepted more from men than it is from women, or at least it was. And I think this leads to the cases where people who don't actually have the disorder but have the characteristics exist. I think that a lot of people, for instance, are narcissistic but are not narcissists, and they're still very difficult to deal with, if not the same. Okay, I don't see any questions. I'm going to just kind of move along until I do. 1 second, we're going to look at how to handle and what to do during litigation with a narcissist or borderline personality disorder. So first, let's talk about what to expect. Now, this really is before and after issues. So, it's what to expect. You'll have it in a divorce, for instance, or a custody case. But you'll even have it afterwards when it comes to parenting time issues. You'll have it throughout a relationship if there's domestic violence issues. So first one is expect to be blamed. Expect to be the blame of everything, from the parenting problems to the dissolution of the marriage, to even things obviously that you haven't done. But it's going to be a constant and chronic issue that you're going to need to deal with, which in a few minutes we'll talk about how to deal with that. But so you should know what's coming. That's going to be one of the most important and most common issues to deal with. Assertive and aggressiveness, going back to the characteristics, even the histrionic and histrionic and I gotta flip back. And dependent personality are still going to be very assertive and aggressive, but in their own manner. Again, it's very subtle. Gross exaggerations, which goes sort of to the last point too, of lies, egregious lies, false allegations. This is probably the most difficult aspect to handle during litigation, because it will continue, and if you don't handle the case correctly, you're often in a defensive mode more of the time than you need or should be. The false allegations, again, they'll be made to everybody. They'll be made to your friends and to your family. They'll be made to DCP&P, which is previously known as DYFS, or Division of Youth and Family Services. They could be criminal allegations. It can come in all directions. So it's just something that you really need to expect and be prepared for in the tips that we'll go through soon. Law enforcement involvement, they will often use the power of law enforcement and the courts to try to exert their influence. And like I said before, lies, egregious lies. This is probably the most difficult, because most people don't expect what they're going to be hit with. People lie, and people expect people to lie, but people don't expect their spouses or intimate partners to make up something so egregious and horrible that you can never believe it would even occur in the first place. But that's exactly what is most common. It usually starts from the beginning and continues all the way through, so you need to really be on guard and prepared for that. Probably the most important. The difficulty that you'll experience with these individuals is that they're very persuasive. Like I said before, they're very charismatic. They're usually very successful. They'll often be well-spoken, and they have this sort of element of surprise, because you don't know what's coming until they've done it. Now you're on the defensive and you're nervous and scared, and it makes it very difficult to challenge this kind of conduct. And lastly, the problem I've experienced more often is a lot of people will go in with the belief that the lies are so outlandish that they couldn't possibly be believed. And sometimes it's just the opposite. The mentality in court can often be they wouldn't say something so outlandish unless it was true. Now, that may be shocking. I know most people are surprised because they would expect family judges to be more cynical about the veracity of the litigants before them, but I found it to be just the opposite, and they tend to believe all of those who come forward, even to my surprise, because I would have expected it to be different. So you need to realize that the things that are going to be said, the gross exaggerations, the lies, are going to be successful if they're not handled properly, and they're going to be believed. And that's probably the biggest challenge that you'll have as you move through any kind of litigation or even in life circumstances with a BPD. Now I'm going to talk a few minutes about the litigation itself. And this is a little hard to generalize because every case is different. All the issues are handled different. I always tell my clients, family law is not difficult, people are. So it's really the level of difficulty you'll be dealing with that determines how difficult your case will be, not the issues of your case. So the first thing I point out is to continue rhetoric. What I mean by that is you need to point out every opportunity you have the conduct of the other person and why the conduct should be under a microscope and remembered. So the first time you file, even if you're the one filing, because as you see 2 down, I say strike first. If you're filing, you want to say things like, this is what is going to happen. This is what he or she's going to say. This is what they're going to allege. And you're going to find that there's simply no proof of it. You're going to find that the proof's actually to the exact contrary. And by continuing rhetoric, I mean the next time you're in court, you take the first paper that you filed outlining how outlandish it isn't going to be and how it was going to continue through the litigation. And you attach it to your second pleading, which is any court paper that you file. And you say in the second one, see, Judge, attached is the first paper I filed, where I advise you this is what was going to happen. This is what he or she was going to say. This is how outlandish it was going to be once the proofs were discovered, and this is the case. He or she's doing it again, and this is why I'm filing the second pleading. And when the third comes up, same thing. Judge, I've been telling Your Honor since the very beginning of this case that this is what was going to happen, and this is what continues to happen. Very, very important, because as you deal with the outlandish allegations and egregious lies, you're going to often want to naturally go into a defensive mode, and that's really the worst thing because that's an uphill climb. You want to stay your own course and not fight their battles. So you always want to be pointing out, this is what they do, this is what they say, this is how they get the judge's attention, this is what they do when you don't make an agreement with them. They run into court over and over and over and over time. The reason I say that is first impressions count in court. When I was a young attorney, I used to think judges didn't remember because they had so many cases that they couldn't possibly remember. The fact is, while they may not remember all of them or even most of them, they'll remember these cases because they are so different, because the issues are so complex, because the allegations are so outrageous, and the risks to the individuals are so great if they don't make the right decisions, that they pay closer attention to these and will remember when you return. Strike first, as I said before, don't wait for them to file something asking for custody or a domestic violence complaint. If you have a basis for something, file first. If you have a divorce case, file for custody, even though you might be the residential custodial parent and your child is living at home with you. This is where you file first and say, I'm filing first because we need custody because my spouse is going to do X, Y, and Z. He or she's going to allege X, Y, and Z. You're going to see it's false and outlandish, and this is what they're going to do. You want to be the first one in there because if you're second, now you're defending yourself. Fourth, don't be the reasonable one. In litigation, in parenting issues, in settlement, it doesn't pay. Most people, and most often, a borderline personality will have a partner that is not as strong of a personality. So they are more likely to be the more reasonable one. And being a reasonable person gives you the mentality that other people are reasonable. So you'll think, well, I'll give in on this point and make things easier, or I'll go halfway on this difference because it puts one less issue, or I'll give parenting time for this weekend so that next time I need something, he or she will agree to it for me. That doesn't work. Matter of fact, in my experience, it's the exact opposite. Um, Put money aside for a divorce fund. And I don't mean just for lawyers, but obviously you are going to need it for lawyers too. But litigation for a BPD and these kind of issues can be very difficult and very costly. First, you do want to interview many different lawyers to see who's capable of handling his issues, but also to see what kind of fees they can expect. You're going to have experts, possibly have experts, depending on the issues of your case. And there are many different types and different costs. There can be business evaluation experts that can be anywhere from $3,000 to $20,000, depending on the type of case or type of business. Real estate appraisals can be anywhere from $300 to $700. May need an employability expert. It can be anywhere from $3,000 to $7,000, maybe even more. Forensic accountants, they charge by the hours if they have to go and do a lifestyle analysis or look for hidden money or a sophisticated business. It can be in the tens of thousands of dollars. Therapists, both as witnesses and also to assist you and possibly your children through the litigation. Some are covered by insurance. Most of them I find are not. Lastly, there are also custody experts and evaluations. They can range anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000. Also, when you believe that you're entering litigation with a BPD, or even in a high conflict, this would really apply, but the topic today being BPD, you also want to know if you have the financial support for your day-to-day needs. Now, there are ways to get temporary support through the courts, but that takes several months. So I normally tell my clients entering these kinds of cases to make sure that you have enough support for yourself to cover your bills for like 2 to 3 months, even if you're just covering your basic needs, like food, clothing, gas. Because when you're a dependent spouse and this case starts, it's often that the support will be terminated until the court orders it. And that would usually take 2 to 4 months before a judge makes makes a decision on an application for support. So now, once a decision is made, if you're awarded support, you're awarded back to when you first filed, which may be a month or two, but plan on 2 to 4 months between the preparation, filing, having the court give a motion date, possible adjournments that pass and cause more delay. You want to make sure that you're funded before you walk into litigation, if you have that option. If you're the one that's going to either be filing a divorce, or even if you're filing a custody action against the other parent that you're not married to, you need to make sure that you're going to be able to weather that storm. Next, let's talk about some custody issues just for a little bit. They are a little unique when dealing with these types of individuals. Now, the first is don't try to co-parent. And any judge that hears me say that will strap me up and beat me with a belt. But it's true. In this kind of a situation, you can't co-parent because the other person is not going to be interested in it. It goes back to my don't be reasonable. I'm not saying don't foster a relationship. I'm not saying don't allow parenting time, but don't try to co-parent in the sense of looking and expecting cooperation. Do the certain things that you're required to do, like turn over the child for parenting time, email them when there's doctor visits and wellness visits, but don't do things like giving them an extra weekend because they asked for it, or equal 50-50 custody, which is a common thing that people now ask for. It's dreadful when you do that. You will not be making the situation easier. What I tell my clients when you're co-parenting or attempting to co-parent with a BPD is to always get something when you give something. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. He or she needs the weekend because they have a wedding, then you get another weekend. He or she wants to have this child go to one college, then you have them cover more of the cost of it. They want to extend the dinner visit to an overnight, then change the pickup and drop-offs. Not just because you're facilitating your own situation, which you would be, because you'd want to get something new, but you're sort of conditioning or teaching them that whenever they want something, they have to give something. And over a course of time, they'll know that and either stop asking or be prepared to, in fact, give something in return for what they need. Therapy, this can be both for the child and for you. I often recommend most people going through any kind of difficult family litigation to have a therapist on their side. You may also need one for court because, generally speaking, therapists won't testify for their clients because they're afraid it ends up being testifying against their clients. So you may need 2 therapists, you may even need 3 or a family therapist, but it's definitely something you want to look into. Parental alienation, I put in here, it's a very common buzzword right now. People throw it around a lot, and a lot of parents are concerned about it. Think about parental alienation. It takes a very long time for one parent to successfully alienate the other. And I often say it really takes 2 to alienate a parent, because if you remain active, and that means enforcing your parenting time, going to court when it's denied, it's not likely that your child will be alienated for you, but expect that they're going to try. And in the cases where they are successful because of either long distance families or bad court decisions, whatever it is, you may also need to look to an expert on parental alienation. And if you think you're going to have a spouse that does that, you may want to start researching them now, because there aren't that many of them out there. But I know of a few, and I'm sure other lawyers know of a few. Expect to feel guilty, and as you may be an unfit parent. And I say this so that you're prepared now to recognize it. You say, oh yeah, that's what I was told was going to happen. Because a lot of people do these things, they stay in these relationships and they think that they're doing it for their children, or they make decisions for their children that may not be the best for them. Trust me when I tell you this, you're not helping the children at all by keeping them in this situation. And that often leads to parents feeling that they're unfit. One, because they're subject to these kinds of allegations. They hear them in court, they hear what the judge's decisions are, and they start to doubt their own abilities. And it makes it more challenging to constantly have to battle when you have these feelings. So it's something you need to realize, which is why I keep saying I urge people to go into therapy from the beginning of these cases and throughout. All right, going to move quickly into the next topic. I don't see any questions posted yet, so let me just move on. Some general tips, and these tips span the gambit of your relationship, even though they come into during litigation. And of course, they are best used for litigation, but I think they can kind of be extrapolated everywhere. Minimize contact, and I call it vanilla communications. Don't fight their battles. Don't write nuh-uh letters when they say you did this. No, I didn't do that, blah, blah. Just respond, simply deny what's inaccurate. You can record your conversations with them. You are allowed to record in New Jersey, and I'm only speaking in New Jersey. You can record any conversation that you're a part of. You cannot record another person's conversation with someone else. You also should remember they could be recording you. So you want to minimize your contact if you can. You want to keep it very vanilla, very simple. You want to plan for the worst, like I've been saying in the beginning. Expect these egregious stories. Expect police involvement. Expect the judge may even believe some of it. But also expect that once this is over and you're living your married life separately, you're still going to have these issues if you have continuing issues like children in common or alimony payments, anything, or even if you co-own a property that needs to be sold or a business that needs to be dissolved. If you're going to have ongoing relationships, plan for this to be the norm. Document everything. I can't say this enough. Every single thing you need to respond. When you can, respond in writing. Even if their conversation to you was verbal, respond with a confirmation to them. Don't make it sound too lawyer-like, but always have everything documented. Even if it's notes for yourself, get a Google Calendar account, make notes on the calendar so you can go back to refresh your recollection. Respond to everything, like I was saying in the beginning, even frivolous accusations with an accurate, non-defensive response. Don't fight their battles, but don't let it go unaddressed either. It's a little bit of a balance you need to walk, but it's an important one. Never, ever admit mistake to anybody. It will be something that they latch onto and that they use over and over and over and over again. Just like when I said, to continue your rhetoric, that's their rhetoric, and they will take it as proof of what they already have been alleging, which is so egregious. So you don't want to give anything that's going to assist them in their battle. Now, let's look at what you would do after litigation, because, as I said, these relationships in many cases will continue. Just because the court is out of it doesn't mean the issues are. You'll have new issues to deal with. So how do you prepare? And I say before and after because, again, you're going to be dealing with the same types of issues. It's certainly more difficult when you're in litigation than when you're out of litigation, but the issues are the same. So first, keep copies and document everything. Like I said, email confirmations, use Google Calendar, back up your documents. There are tons of electronic filing capabilities. They can usually be utilized through a cell phone, dictaphone recordings. There's really no reason to not document and keep copies of everything. Even financial records and tax returns and credit cards. I'm actually always surprised at how many clients come in to me, and even in today's society say, I don't know how much my spouse makes. I just signed the tax returns that were put in front of me. I don't know how much credit card debt the other person has. You need to document all these things. Even if it's not a marriage, but you have a co-parenting relationship, you want to keep copies of everything because you just never know what you're going to need. Next, talk to friends and witnesses before, during, and after. The reason is, not only do you need to make sure that you have other people that you make aware of these issues so that later comes time to defend yourself against them or to present them as your rhetoric, you have people that are aware of it at the time it happened, not just people that you talk to afterwards. You want people to really be engaged in the ongoing relationship. And also, you want to make sure before you need them that they're going to be involved and willing to cooperate. You may have somebody that witnesses, the most egregious child abuse act, or somebody hears them admit that he was lying, or is even present about something that they're now lying about. But if they're not willing to come forward, that's not only not going to help you, but if you're waiting until the time that you have to file papers to find that out, you're really going to be scrambling for help. So you want to do this throughout your relationship so that you know who is your friend and who is your foe. Again, seek therapy with somebody experienced in BPD and interview lawyers involved in BPD. I also put high conflict because I think you'll find that there aren't a lot of lawyers or therapists that are well-versed in borderline personality disorders or narcissism, but you will have many that are involved in high conflict divorce and family law cases. And it's a good second because the characteristics are similar. Ask them for predictable scenarios, not just what's going to happen, but also ask what they think the costs are going to be, what they think the likely outcomes are going to be. Now, while that's always hard to predict, anybody with a good amount of experience will give you at least a range of cost, a range of outcomes. A good lawyer will tell you whether you're going to get 5 or 20 years of alimony. I mean, they can't say, they should have a better sense than that kind of a range, even though they can't tell you with exact that's going to be 8. And therapists, similarly, they should be able to tell you what you can expect both from the therapist and from your partner. Shut down internet networking pages. Don't destroy them because, one, that's unethical and against the law, especially if you're in litigation. But there's a backup to them anyway. I think each page has its own internal way of backing up. But you want to stop using them because not only things that you post can be used against you, but also a lot of them track your locations. And that can be used and twisted in ways that you didn't anticipate. I do recommend at the same time that you stop using yours, that you start reviewing theirs. Start running their names through the web browsers to find out where they are, whether it's LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter. Start reviewing their posts. And then most importantly, make or take screenshots of whatever you see that you think may or may be helpful in your future, because it may disappear later and you'll have no access to it. Learn how to take screenshots. If you have an iPhone, you can do it on your iPhone. If you have a Mac computer, I know you can do it there, I imagine. Windows-based computers do the same thing. So don't let anything pass by. Even if you're not sure whether it will or will not help you, take it. Better to have it and not need it than the opposite. Now, the next topic is something that I do recommend you consider Hopefully you never need to, and in most cases they don't, but it is something that you should be aware of, and that's having an emergency plan. My job is basically helping people who say, I never thought they would do this to me. So you need to plan for the fact that you could, in fact, be that person one day, unfortunately. One, you want to have a safe place to go. That can be anywhere. Most places are largely safe because there's other people around. Friends' houses, families' houses. But also most towns will have, or many towns will have, domestic violence shelters. Maybe if you're getting a hotel, pick one that's relatively close to a police department. While I don't want to, scare people too much, I do think being prudent is very helpful in a case like this. Copy the records. Like I said, there are tons of electronic ways to store records, and Evernote on your computer and your iPhone with photographs. Once again, document everything. In here, this is more difficult, but I would urge you, in addition to making notes, there's a lot of software that allows you to track family parenting issues and custody issues. Like I said, Google Calendar I think is great for documenting things like that. Choose every word carefully. I've already said that a number of times. I can't say that enough. And lastly, and most importantly, expect that the judge is going to see everything. And this is what's important, because people have a bad tendency, and I'm always surprised by this, of writing, saying, and sending things that they would never want a judge to see, and that they do it out of a moment of anger. We all do it. But what happens is that one moment is then used to support the stories about how horrible of a person you are. And if they haven't, a response or a text message that sounds like that. Like I had a domestic violence case where I had the nicest, calmest, most considerate client who had successfully co-parented with his ex-wife for years. He used to go and shovel her driveway when it snowed. And he sent one disgusting text out of anger. He was fed up, and that text was used against him, and he ended up getting adverse treatment from the court. So always remember, somebody may be reading it. Don't leave a voicemail. It is admissible. Texts are admissible. Emails are read now. Don't think it's going to be just between the two of you. It will later be used, and you don't want to have that kind of detriment against you. So just remember that whatever you're going to say, I would say expect that a judge may see it. Last quick topic is children. Just a few tips as we close out. Don't ask the children about the other parent. And that's really in all types of litigation. But in this type of litigation, it's often something parents want to do because it's the best source of information. If you're concerned that they're trying to alienate your children, or that they're going to be filing for physical custody or sole custody, it's quick, easy to go to the child. But it's not only is it not good for the child, it will hurt you in court if the judges think you're purposely involving your children. Which is the next point: don't discuss court. Now here's a problem though, because in many of these cases, the other person will be discussing court with the children, and you can't leave that unattended. You either need to bring it right into a court and have a court address it, or you have to find a way to negate it without doing the same thing, without doing anything that's going to upset your child. But you need to negate it, even if it's by saying that the fact that dad or mom is saying this to you, it's not appropriate, it's not true, don't worry about it. But you do need to address it. Because if you don't, it's like planting a seed. And in a child, that's probably the easiest thing to do. Last is make sure that your therapist, I know I've said this a dozen times, but it's really important, again, before, during, and after, for your children, to have somebody that they know they can go to with trust and confidence that will help them. They don't always feel that they can go to mom and dad because of what mom and dad are doing with one another. That is, I believe, the end of the information. I will take as much time to answer any questions. I don't see any that are up here. I'm going to open the window up a little bit bigger in case anybody wants to. Does anybody have any questions? And it doesn't necessarily have to be related to the specific topic of a borderline personality. If you have questions about a high conflict divorce or an issue that's pending, feel free to ask me now while I'm still here. All right, I'm not seeing any questions. I just want to make sure that everybody still hears me. I think I would have gotten messages if I don't. Can somebody just type that you can hear me, but you don't have a question, so I know it's time to end? Okay, no, we have a question. Good. What is it wise for the other? Oh, and by the way, people, I should have said this before, but nobody can see your question, and I don't think anybody can see your name, so you don't need to worry about anonymity. But so the question was posed: is it wise for the other parent to discuss child support with the children? No, for many reasons. One, it's not good to discuss litigation with the children. There, and it's not an issue that they know anything about. Most parents don't really understand child support or what it represents. I actually did a whole webinar on child support because people think it's an easy issue and it's not. It's very complicated. So never. Now, if you have an 18-year-old that's going to college, maybe that's different because you have different housing costs and food costs both at home and at school. But other than that one exception, no, I wouldn't ever discuss child support with the children. I'll give it another minute. Anybody else have any other questions? All right, well, I appreciate you spending this time with me. I hope this was helpful. Keep an eye out for my emails of future webinars. I do one every month at 6:30, and usually the last Thursday of each month. And if you think of any questions once I disconnect, you should have my email from the registration. Just send me an email, and I'll address any questions that you have. With that, I hope you have a good night, and goodbye.